Hey everybody, I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jesse.
And today we're going to go over some of the advantages and disadvantages of fat tire e-bikes.
Next on Now Let's Review. Back in the days of old, before motors graced the likes of bikes, you almost would never see a fat tire bike. So let's talk about what a fat tire bike is. Believe it or not, we're talking about the tire on the bike being rather large.
So we can start off this video with some of the advantages to fat tire bikes, one of which is that they can generally go over a much larger variety of terrain than bikes with normal sized tires. This includes, sand, mud, snow. These are all things that the fat tire bikes can pretty easily float over compared to a bike with normal sized tires, which would kind of cut through all of these things and make it pretty difficult to maneuver.
You can't really ride a normal bike on the beach. The tires are too narrow and they sink down. A fat tire bike, the tires are wider and, like you're saying, floating. It has enough surface area to, even a loose surface, it can apply enough pressure over a wide enough area to not sink down into the sand. And that makes fat tire e-bikes capable of handling a lot more terrain.
And another advantage to the fat tires over normal sized tires is that you have more air in the tire is bigger, and that gives you more of an opportunity to deflate those tires if you're going over particularly difficult terrain. You probably noticed that if you've ever seen like off-road trucks or like monster trucks or anything, they deflate the tires when they're going over really rough stuff so that the tires can kind of sink and deform over the terrain that they're going on. And the same can apply to fat tire bikes as well. If you've got super rocky, rooty, rough, loose terrain, deflating the tires will allow more surface area and more traction, therefore allowing you to go over even more terrain.
The next point about fat tire e-bikes is that they can be a little bit more stable to ride. This of course has to do with having a nice wider tire beneath you, and that means that you have a little bit more give when you're talking about balancing on an e-bike.
Another advantage to fat tire e-bikes is that they are oftentimes more powerful than your e-bikes with normal sized tires. Because the fat tire e-bikes are generally bigger and have more mass, they put bigger motors in them and oftentimes bigger batteries so that they can move those bikes along.
All right, so now let's start to get into some of the disadvantages of a fat tire e-bike. The first reason is that it's harder to pedal. It's just literally harder to put the power in because you have more rolling resistance with these bigger, fatter tires. It's not necessarily a disadvantage with an e-bike because it's usually paired with a battery and a motor that's going to be propelling you forward and kind of taking up your slack, making it a fun and enjoyable ride. But if you ever run out of battery juice, pedaling it without assistance is going to be very difficult.
The increased weight of fat tire e-bikes over normal e-bikes has other disadvantages, one of which is that it is going to be much heavier to lift it and transport it or store it. You're looking at a significantly heavier bike than what you might be used to picking up. And your bike racks might not even be able to hold these big, heavy fat tire e-bikes. Another big disadvantage of the fat tire e-bikes is just the size in general. These bikes are almost always much larger than your average e-bike, which means a couple things. First of all, if you are a shorter person, you might not be able to comfortably ride one of these fat tire bikes. They're often taller even with the lowest seat height than a lot of e-bikes are with, the seat height low down or even pretty high up. Another issue with the size of the fat tire e-bikes is storage. If you don't have a lot of space to put these bikes, it might not be the right bike for you. These bikes do take up significantly more space than the average e-bike just because of the tire size and the frame that they have to make to accommodate those tires.
Now, one disadvantage that is hardly ever going to be talked about because it doesn't really make that big a difference is efficiency. An e-bike with big fat tires is going to use more energy per mile than an e-bike with smaller tires.
And the larger battery that they put into the fat tire e-bikes often leads to another disadvantage, which is the increased cost. The most expensive part of e-bikes is the battery and the motor. So generally speaking, fat tire e-bikes are going to be more on the costly side than normal e-bikes with normal sized tires.
And that's why I want to bring up this video's sponsor, SteadyRack. They make lots of different racks for bikes and e-bikes, and they even have fat tire e-bike mounts. These things are awesome. You can install them on your wall. You can roll the front fat tire of your e-bike onto it and then pivot it over to the side, getting it out of the way. We have many of these in the studio in order to accommodate all of the bikes that we do while we review them, and they are a great addition to any garage or storage space where you need to get these bikes kind of up and out of the way.
So if you have e-bikes that you're looking to store, make sure you check out SteadyRack. We'll put a link to their website in the description so you can go check them out for yourself. So obviously when you're making the decision on whether or not to purchase a fat tire e-bike, take everything we've said with a grain of salt. It depends entirely on who you are as a rider, what kind of terrain you're going to be riding on, what kind of storage you have. All of these factors are going to go into choosing whether or not to get a fat tire e-bike. Well, anyways, that wraps it up for this episode. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in fat tire e-bikes, we have tons of reviews of fat tire e-bikes here on Now Let's Review. Make sure you go check those out. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please hit like. Also subscribe if you're interested in this kind of content, and we will see you next time.
Now Let's Review.